Margot Lane had dedicated nearly 4 decades of her life to teaching music in the unassuming town of Pinewood Ridge. From an early age, she had been drawn to the piano, her small hands dancing over the ivories. Over the years, she learned how to coax something magical from any instrument she touched, be it a grand piano or a battered saxophone rescued from a yard sale. While teaching was not always glamorous, she relished moments of pure discovery. The instant a student realized a chord progression wasn't just a series of notes, but a bridge to something deeper. Her gentle nature and weathered experience formed a unique bond with those who longed to create beautiful sounds. Yet while she had given her heart to the craft, she sometimes feared her own passion had become academic, locked away in exercises and scales. In her quiet moments, she wondered if she had sacrificed too much of her personal life for a profession that required her whole soul. Her routine changed abruptly one summer day when Zach Bronson, a brash, leather jacket wearing rocker, roared into Pinewood Ridge on his vintage motorcycle. He was the kind of man who didn't just walk into a room. He arrived with thunder, commanding every eye. The local whispers traveled faster than the wind. Zach Bronson, lead guitarist of the broken up band Divine Ruin, had rolled through town on a whim. He needed soulful coaching, the rumor mill reported. Folks who recognized him from old magazine covers and gossip columns expected him to be arrogant and unpredictable, someone too wild for polite society. Margot dismissed much of the chatter, deciding she could only judge a man by meeting him face to face. So when Zach arrived at her modest studio with a request for lessons, she felt herself bracing for an electric vibe that seemed to spark around him wherever he went. Without the slightest hint of shyness, Zach strolled into her studio, towering over her, clad in black jeans and t-shirt, his arm adorned with elaborate tattoos. He exuded a rebellious charm. He offered a handshake, and Margot noticed the calluses on his fingertips. They told tales of nights spent slamming guitar strings. "I hear you're the best in town," he announced, voice gritty and melodic at once. She expected him to follow up with a cocky grin, but it never came. Instead, he added quietly, "Everyone says you can help me find the soul again." Those words lodged in her mind. He was looking for something intangible, something she wasn't sure could be taught. Nevertheless, after just a few moments of conversation, she recognized a weariness behind his bold exterior, a fatigue of someone who once flew too high until life forced him back to earth. They set the first official lesson for a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Margot's studio was a space of warm acoustics and soft lighting. Rows of sheet music lined one wall, aged instruments and framed awards filled another. Zach arrived punctually, guitar case slung over his shoulder. As he tuned up, Margot glimpsed a subtle tremor in his hand. He muttered something about not sleeping well, but she resisted pressing. Her professional routine began with assessing each student. She had him play a simple piece, a well-known folk melody. Zach's fingers danced across the fretboard effortlessly, but no matter how skillful his execution, something felt hollow. Margot observed him intently, searching for the core behind the technique. She could sense the building blocks of enormous talent, but the intangible spirit was buried under years of rock star posturing and restless living. After letting him finish, she offered a small nod. "You've got impeccable technique, Zach," she said softly, "but you're leaving something out. Let's see if we can bring it back." It was an uphill climb at first. Zach wasn't used to being told he lacked anything. Even if he had wandered in on his own, old habits of defensive pride lingered. He'd snap at Margot if she corrected his posture. He'd roll his eyes when she asked him to slow down and dissect a chord. Yet, between moments of defiance, Margot caught glimpses of humility in him, almost as if he recognized she was guiding him to a long-lost truth. The problem, she suspected, wasn't purely musical. It lay in Zach's heart, weighed down by regrets and a gnawing sense of displacement. Eventually, After a heated argument about him overplaying some scale runs, Margot handed him a cup of tea and told him a story of her own youth. Back then, she had run off with a small touring band, thinking it would bring her closer to stardom. Instead, she discovered the reality of smoky bars, inconsistent pay, and restless nights. "I loved the music, but I nearly forgot what it meant to truly feel it," she confided. Zach's rebellious glare softened, and for just a moment, teacher and student bonded over the universal ache that comes from losing one's way. As the weeks passed, Margot introduced Zach to different styles, from jazz to soul ballads. He found himself wrestling not with the notes, but with the emotion behind them. She insisted he listen deeply, feel the sadness in Billie Holiday's voice, the joy in Ray Charles's piano riffs, and the desperation in Janis Joplin's wails. At first, Zach resisted. His walls were firmly built, but incrementally, Margot wore away his cynicism. One day he stayed behind after a session to tinker on the upright piano in the corner. Margot overheard the gentle chords drifting through the air, notes that spoke of longing and quiet introspection. She paused in the hallway, enthralled. When he finally stopped, she stepped in with a supply of fresh sheet music. The stunned look on his face said everything. He hadn't realized how far he'd let his guard down. Margot took him under her wing not just as a teacher, but as a mentor who recognized a soul wounded by the harshness of fame. She learned from the local bartender that Zach had suffered a serious falling out with his bandmates, culminating in the group's breakup. He had spiraled into a deep creative rut, unable to write a single genuine piece of music for over a year. That revelation helped her understand his unspoken confusion, the reason he'd come searching for an intangible something. By encouraging him to slow down, to reflect, she chipped away at the defenses he had spent years crafting. They continued with seemingly basic exercises, playing simple melodies and focusing on each note's resonance. With every lesson, Zach's playing took on more color and quiet intensity, as though a dormant dream were stirring once again. A certain afternoon, the summit of his frustration arrived. He smashed his palm against the side of the piano after stumbling through a delicate waltz. "I'm no good at gentle," he snapped. "I've always been about raging riffs and big solos." Margot watched him for a moment before calmly replying, "You can have depth without losing that power. Sometimes, even a whisper can carry the force of a scream." Their eyes locked, and for the first time, Zach didn't fight back. Perhaps he saw an undeniable conviction in her gaze. She handed him a worn-out vinyl record featuring a soulful ballad. "Find the color in the quiet," she said, kneading the tension from her own hands. That night, he listened to the record over and over, letting the haunting vocals seep into his consciousness until the music no longer felt foreign, but painfully real. Meanwhile, life beyond the lessons wove their paths ever closer. One late evening, Margot found Zach in the local park, perched on a bench next to the modest lake. She joined him quietly, the sun setting behind them in watercolor streaks of orange and pink. His expression was less guarded now. He admitted how heavy the shadows of his past weighed on him. Failed relationships, betrayals among friends who once felt like brothers. Margot listened, occasionally offering a softly spoken reassurance. She too divulged how she had once been enamored with a fellow musician. They had planned a life of touring and recording sessions, but it crumbled when the rigors of the road revealed irreconcilable differences. "Music can be heartbreaking, but it can also heal," she mused. In that delicate twilight, they found an unspoken closeness, connected by their shared experiences of trying to find solace in chords and melodies. Their connection translated seamlessly into the lessons. Zach began experimenting with partial chords and suspensions, conjuring notes that evoked a sense of longing. Margot's eyes shone with pride whenever his playing displayed a newfound tenderness. Watching him shift from harsh distortions to softly strummed acoustic lines teased her heart with possibilities beyond the music. She tried to deny the flutter that rose in her chest whenever he flashed a genuine smile. After all, she was his seasoned instructor, and he was the rebellious musician who once graced magazine covers. Their worlds weren't supposed to collide in anything close to romance. Yet each lesson brought them a step closer to acknowledging something that had started as mere sparks but now roared like a hidden crescendo. When a local charity event approached, Margot was invited to perform. For years, she had filled that role alone, typically playing a well practiced classical piece on the piano. However, the letter also suggested that this year, a duet might be a welcome change. She toyed with the idea and eventually asked Zach if he would join her in a short performance that highlighted the soulful aspects they had been working on. His initial reaction was guarded. "I don't do well with small audiences," he joked bitterly. But beneath his attempt at humor, she sensed fear. Fear that his authenticity might be laid bare in front of strangers. She explained how local events in Pinewood Ridge were welcoming, not judgmental. After some reservation, he agreed. "All right, but don't expect me to wear a bow tie," he teased, eliciting a delighted laugh from Margaret. Rehearsals for their duet transformed their dynamic. They chose a slow, bluesy track that allowed Zach to weave intricate guitar lines around Margot's piano chords. Each day they worked on subtle nuances, perfecting fades and crescendos, ensuring the music breathed naturally. Though a few disagreements sparked, Zach occasionally wanted to ramp up the energy, while Margot insisted on preserving the soulful hush. They learned to listen to each other. Their synergy was fluid. One afternoon, after a lengthy rehearsal, the final note lingered in the air. Margot found her breath catching strangely in her throat. The music had felt so charged, so personal. It was as if their hearts were confessing emotions they struggled to put into words. Zach's eyes met hers, and in that quiet, suspended moment, it was clear that they were no longer merely teacher and student. The night of the charity event arrived. The community center was adorned with hanging lights, the makeshift stage holding a modest audience of townspeople who loved Margot dearly. Zach, dressed in his typical black attire, stood at the edge of the stage, guitar in hand. He kept his head bowed until Margot joined him at the piano bench and gave him a reassuring glance. Then he took a deep breath. The first few notes were so gentle, you could almost hear a pin drop. Slowly, the music unfurled like a long hidden secret. Zach's fingers coaxed the warmest tones from his instrument, each note echoing with the heartbreak and optimism that had shaped his life. Margot's piano chords wrapped around his melody, supporting him like a steadfast friend. An electrifying hush fell over the audience. Halfway through, someone began weeping softly in the back row, touched by the raw sweetness of their duet. After the final chord, applause erupted. Zach's chest heaved with the exertion of playing his heart out. Margot rose from the bench and gave a small bow, her eyes brimming with unshed tears of pride. Then something impromptu happened. Zach stepped forward and took her hand. Without a word, he pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. She froze, aware they were on public display, but a wave of warmth coursed through her veins. The audience watched in stunned delight, and many began whistling or clapping louder. Later, much later, when the crowd dwindled and they packed up their instruments, Margot found Zach standing near her, his arm draped protectively around her shoulders. "Thank you," he whispered, "for helping me remember what music is supposed to feel like." She smiled through teary eyes. "Thank you for reminding me that there's still more to discover," she replied. At that moment, love didn't seem like a far-fetched notion. It felt natural, like the next chord in an ever-unfolding composition. As rumors spread of their onstage closeness, some tongues in Pinewood Ridge wagged, while many cheered them on. Margot wrestled with self-doubt, worried about the gossip and the age difference. During a lesson, soon after the performance, she tried to address it. "We need to be careful," she began, hands trembling slightly. "You have a future beyond this town, and Zach cut her off gently by setting his guitar aside and catching her hands in his. I don't care about rumors. I care about this, he said, and I care about what we can create together. He spoke with a gentle intensity that warmed every corner of her heart. Opening up to him, she realized, was like taking the biggest leap of her life. Yet she found faith in the knowledge that music itself was a leap, a plunge into placing trust in invisible vibrations. Why not trust in love the same way? Their closeness began to shape new musical ventures. Zach picked up the threads of half finished songs he'd abandoned months ago. With Margot's guidance, he composed lyrics that embraced vulnerability rather than glossing over it. The teacher and the rocker discovered they weren't just forging a personal connection, they were writing a new chapter in music, one that blended raw energy with soulful resonance. Margot watched as Zach's once restless spirit calmed into something driven but focused. Every riff he played carried an undercurrent of gratitude. Every chord Margot touched rung out with renewed wonder for a craft she thought she had known inside and out. They worked late into the nights, sometimes drifting off in the studio with sheet music scattered around them, only to awaken to find they had been dreaming of new harmonies and lyrics they longed to share with each other. Eventually, Zach decided he wanted to do something grander with this revived spark. Though he had parted ways with Divine Ruin, he suggested a small album featuring collaborations with local talents in Pinewood Ridge. Margaret smiled at the ambition in his eyes. The process wasn't easy. All insecurities cropped up, and they wrestled with technical obstacles in the makeshift recording sessions. Still, each challenge only welded them closer. Margaret discovered that rekindling someone else's passion made her own spirit blaze again. Even at moments when stress threatened to overshadow creativity, a tender smile from Zach reminded her of the powerful connection they shared. On a quiet evening after a day of recording, they stood on the small patio outside Margot's home. Fireflies hovered over her garden. In the hush of the moment, Zach turned to her, searching her face as if it were a song he was trying to understand. All this time, he said softly, I thought I lost music, but I think what I really lost was faith in everything. You gave that back to me. Tears stung Margot's eyes. She hesitated for a beat before confessing. You reminded me that my life can be more than lectures and rehearsals. It can be about feeling and risking, even daring to love again. The evening air felt charged with an unspoken invitation. Gently, he leaned down and let his lips brush hers. Thunder didn't crash, the earth didn't shake, but the quiet intimacy left them breathless, hearts pounding in unison. It was their truest duet yet. In the following months, the two of them forged an unlikely but beautiful partnership. Music teacher and former rock star, bound by a shared zeal for melodic storytelling and the blossoming love that refused to be overshadowed by doubt. They built a small studio in Pinewood Ridge, arising from Lager's desire to cultivate local talent. Zach, newly inspired, began to draw in other musicians. He felt no need to run back to the bright lights of bigger cities. Here, in this quaint town, he discovered something more profound, a place where his music wasn't drowned out by ego or noise. And Margot rediscovered the thrill of creation, stepping out of her comfort zone of polished classical performance to embrace the unpredictable spark of collaboration. Though the future remained unwritten, they approached it with the same sense of wonder they poured into their music, fully aware that each new chord, like each new day, could hold surprising dissonances and longed-for resolutions. When Margot's aging upright piano occasionally stuck on a key, Zach would laugh and say, You know, I like the imperfections. It reminds me that real music, like real love, isn't always perfect. He bestowed a tender grin, knowing how much she treasured each imperfection in their journey. In those moments, Margot felt a sensation like hearing a favorite melody for the first time. She recognized that the truest resonance within them was born from harmony and contrast, tension and release, a living tapestry that transformed their hearts and reclaimed the soul of music.